Yep. Okay. Obama's coming to take your guns. It's time to suit up in your right away blues and use your weapons to protect your freedom and country. From drone strikes against rabbis in the Middle East to slaughter of black youths on the streets of Chicago, the military industrial complex controls our every move and thought. That's about power guns, controls our small G, and violence becomes normalized. Your road 110. Gun violence, British culture, civil violence, shootings, and terrorism in society, relies on violence, culture, violence, gun, extract from physical violence, drives the average industry and militaristic policy, and these states raise and is the state racial to enforce domestic terrorism against blind youth start, like how many replace solitary self-interest for society to consumers and put somewhere else of the anti-gun culture have been the power of the gun lobby, your policies, and match my losses, your press moves, mutual each other, self-society, generating into military organization of police, use this source of power to criminalize behavior, cops, activists, and security by criminalizing individuals and against political self-interest and replaced by economic self-interest lobby, is carried out by the enemy militarization represents powerful social logic, institution, values, and identity, of politicalizing critical citizenship as a result of inculcated intellectual militarism in every institution, including schools, people working their disposal to be safe, unfinancially, militarism, right, support for policies that protect others, Americans do not really engage in violence, they are entertained by this movement for policy, torture, enjoys medical trust, and false promises, security, want to make sure Americans are armed to protect themselves against the apparitions whipped up by politicians, not ready to provide over discourse, or ignoring harshing and level public state or monitoring, calls do not go far enough, guns have to as well as actual power, violence, and violence, fantasies have proliferate, refusal to enact control, symptom back to death of market, and not to the public support one that puts the collapse of actions and a militarized culture, combat, financial, leave our country out of approximately 300 million firearms, and which are handed each, that make it as quickly and effectively as possible, and militarism permeates even the space we occupy and has killed democracy, challenging its ideological stronghold, the academy is creating vital alternatives for change. Thus, the role of the balance of debater whose advocacy best breaks down our militaristic culture of violence. Giroux 15. It is crucial that intellectuals unite to reclaim democracy. Such action necessitates the tyranny materials of all the force to hide behind conflict. Differences to growing democracy, matters of education must be at the heart of any valuable politics, civilly executive is through such recognition steps to be taken to challenge the ideological space of politics of amnesia and its imagination machine must be distilled with clear and hopefully meaningful alternatives. And our approach to fighting militarism must begin with mutual action. As our real solutions is as useless as action force from theory to row. 14. Understanding must be linked to all these sectors, real problems and next concrete solution. We need to think about what system we want. Real solutions when the power society was best critical opinion, first maximum often sterile, as action force from theory, we need to politics of acknowledge meaningful and gun culture replicates patriarchal nationalism and individualism. Many get guns to protect their families from those marked as criminal. Dominant 14. Owning guns is reduced to national identity that souls individuals from gun label under such as works of use to carry out criminal assimilation acts. With the emphasis on being able to subject service and identity for many members of the community that these works to be influenced by power and individuals and criminalities of historical appeals to colonialism, capitalism, patriarchal nationalism, individuals who are literally unknowingly forcing the common identity guns to protect themselves from any use of an act. It's not like the Indians rolling peacefully back then. The gun is woven into the tapestry of the USA process of other rings, societies, including orders, white supremacy, discourse formation, their state defense, bad operations, regulatory manage that, allows their men to retain hegemonic status, the way differences constructed can lead to present facts and gun rights, fuels the space of the collective, they analyze individuals and amplify fear and prejudice. Deprivator 15. Fragmentation of society into atavistic individuals who identify by progression there, perhaps some individuals that more tuned the government or abuse against the collective individuals can act mostly in private organization according to prejudices. Arms to represent suspicion of the collective guns have been spared from the community causes others to treat them with your gun rights with the ultimate goal alone. The gun movement between individual against society collectives or suspect the gun movement offers radical individuals and thus the plan. The United States federal government in a coordinated effort with the 50 state governments to ban private ownership of handguns. Hardware 2. The coordinated approach will include coordination of enforcement activities at the federal government deciding on the resources and federal regulations to accept for the not enough ATF agents, state police would continue to accept witnessing and federal government should regulate in a well-coordinated manner, and gun control is the only solution to our pathological militaristic culture predicated on violence and individualism. Giroux 15. Liberal banning reforms now work on culture normalizing everyday violence, which is finding communities and others considered disposable be governments of violence and these are remaining on lobby that produce militarism, sanctions, welfare with our corporate institutions, violence continues legitimated by cowardly acts of politicians, gun lobbies, for and campaigns who supported their interests. Gun control lines, violence surely anti-violent against affection, not perfectly but overwhelmingly. Every word's been taken seriously. The cultural grounds cannot be extracted from the basis of violence. One money county if the next work becomes clear. The country of fueling a national as a U.S. national welfare state to warfare state. Violence gives normalized gun violence is tied to economic violence, sexual ministry, special evidence that make revolvers, the written media actions, gun control, and handgun bans are key. Americans view them as a quintessential weapon. The money seems to stand against the culture of violence. Rule of 9. The court's explanation of weapon handgun some constitutional including how lawyers are recommended people consider the handgun the quintessential self-defense weapon. Handguns are popular with for self-defense and mere possibility of concealed gun chills, discourse on controversial issues in schools, altering democracy. Deprivator 15. Democracy takes root in schools that are guns are greatly introduced to proliferation and musical outer campus of their proliferation also where all of us must look into the history of the impact on college campus. Classrooms is a refuge of lecture where controversial ideas, air guns are nebulous project one, culture teachers witness contact between arguing students, guns, chats, and speech, and the one I see ruptures the mindset of guns is necessary for self-defense. People are no longer constantly reminded guns of guns as means of solving their problems. 9. 13. Government puts buyback government discount session where the fall the collision 1,100,000 the great crime the country is. The great cultural shift guns are no longer credible for self-defense and less private individuals are reminded guns are need to address our life differences, and the gun debate is a question of culture, not K and 3. Dispute over the death penalty limits of all gun control business and kind of gun bases about what makes a base it's not disagreement about facts, but an alternative views about what America has to be believed about risk right cultural views. We have disagreement about consequences unless we have a common ground around values, gun laws, respect gun control that's perfectly on the cultural theory of certain cultural parts of perceptions with these correlate with cultures developing individuals' cultural orientations of fairness, strong application of the attitude toward guns, and then any other facts. There is no prospect that empirical data applies to these under ordinary sense of trust. No one to share the cultural outlook of it. One believes about consequences of gun control will be derivative of worldviews, and the act is a war on propaganda. Vote F, because banning handguns is the right thing to do. Nixon, 99. To allow considerations of real policy to influence our attention toward luggage and status quo, certain consequences are easy to find. When the abolitionists movement was being little advocacy, they had no realistic chance at that time of persuading Congress to abolish slavery. The abolitionists movement did continue with what realities were incrementally to restrict slavery. This is precisely the rule that applied to position claim discussing handgun control, while underwriting the origin of the handgun policy that was best reduce violence or respect rights.
Why do people buy guns?
Our gun evidence indicates that it is in the same, like they're trying to emulate what they call pioneers or settlers, and they're like, well, we need to protect ourselves.
Right. So a militaristic, fear-driven culture in America drives people to buy guns. Why does reducing the number of guns solve that culture as opposed to the culture already existing before people have guns?
So argument is a few pieces of evidence, both of the Jerome cards and our Donahue 15 evidence are pretty good on this issue. I'll go through them. Jerome says that a large portion of those guns are handguns.
Right. And so that implies that people are using handguns as a response to a culture. Why does that imply that guns would solve that culture?
Yeah, the Donahue 15 evidence, if you read the
Donahue is the one card, because the Jerome cards agree don't say that.
Donahue says, no. You don't just get to be like, we agree they don't say that. That was never said.
Donahue says, in Australia, guns had a shift on culture. This is one line at the bottom of the card. What's the more?
The argument is that because guns were no longer available for self-defense, people started looking to other ways to result in.
Why is that true? That is one line from the card.
It's indicated by things like the murder rate held to 1.
So Australia also has drastically different culture than the U.S. For example, in Australia, people were accepting of more types of government policies. There were different political leaders who were accepting and willing to pass.
So it seems like your argument
your
argument seems to just be like some people are assholes and don't want to stop or like pass policies.
No, I don't think that's the point at all. If gun control militarism and fear of others are inherent to American culture and are not part of, for example, Australian culture, how would a ban on guns in America solve that cultural problem?
The first problem is you have not substantiated the claim that did not exist in Australia. Our evidence is that before there to be a cultural shift, obviously there was something.
Okay, so the plan, you say USFG in a coordinated effort with the 50-state government. What does that mean?
Federal government passes the plan that goes enforce it.
So, what type of coordination would exist between federal government and states?
So do we talk about that being things like the ATF and local and state police working?
So right now, the only way government enforces laws in states is through, for example, interstate commerce policies. What types of those policies, or what things would the government do to coordinate efforts with the states? What would the government do to coordinate efforts with the states?
I think that explanation that I just gave, which is that ATF agents would work together to distribute responsibility or allocate resources with state and local police officers, seems to be like a fairly compelling explanation.
Okay. Framework arguments. What is the role of the judge? What impact is evaluating?
The role of the balance first debater whose advocacy best breaks down our military.
Yeah. What does that look like?
I think that is contextualized by the jury card at the top of the line. See, that says cultural balance is predicated on not only individuals engaging in violence, but also being entertained by it, which we say is mimicking things like foreign policies. We say that decreasing militarism is really good, and that leads to other impacts like politics of disposability, where some people are not, like, their lives are not worth living, or their lives are not of value.
Okay, what enforcement mechanism do you use them?
What does that mean?
Like buyback programs, mandatory compensation, etc.
Yeah, we'll defend the mandatory program.
Okay, 355. Where is it? What? It's called quarter case. Thank you. Everyone ready? Yes.
Interpretation, the act may not defend that the U.S. federal government taking action in coordination with the 50 states violations. He says, this also describes the solvency advocate. This is done, the solvency advocate says done regulations are sometimes done in coordination with federal, U.S. and state programs. It doesn't say that together they should pass the banned standards versus expertise. The act about measure practices like stationary data and training programs for officials. As much as that local police officers say don't have handguns, but it creates new programs to try to make the law more effective. It lets you get solvency if they're not part of the resolution. If Congress passed ban handguns, you wouldn't assume that entails the funding for new training programs, initiatives, etc. Adding those types of coordination is something not inherent to a handgun ban. Additionally, the way federal enforcement occurs is via the Commerce Clause in the Constitution. The only thing the federal government can do to make the states enforce the policy is withhold funds. So something like a partnership between the ATF and local law agencies would have to be authorized through a separate law that does not currently exist, which makes the act expertise is a voting issue. They can add anything to the extra to the advocacy to co-op make it that. It's also unpredictable, so they can do literally anything outside of the resolution. Key to advocacy skills, but to defend their position against low research objection. Second, is utopian. The real world 56 every day. Six decide to do anything. They don't act together because they disagree over issues and they never talk to each other. One of the core negative concerns is that states would never enforce the policy, even if the USFG passes. They just don't really wave a magic wand at the problem without addressing it. Just defending the USFG passes a policy or a single state does it is comparatively better, but they can see out that one state or a government might do something, and I think it tests its efficacy. But if you have all work together uniquely, that empirically proven states that they won't enforce federal gun ban courts and going 14, the no occasion we hold the federal laws do not apply to farmers within a state. It's basically saying federal government, if you want to enforce federal laws in state Arizona, you're welcome to do it, but we won't give you any assistance. No state police, no local law enforcement, none of that. That's also key to ground. Equal part of the next bill that challenge the act of logistical problems and implementation policy making is based on implementation. Elmore, ED analysis of policy is not very little connected to particular lane. No citizens is poorly understood. 90% of the world implementation utopian beyond the fact that advocacy skills don't learn about no problems and solutions, and they ignore big controversy in literature. It's also not implementations that would never happen. D point, advocacy skills is the most is a voter. The lots of messaging so when we need to consider advocacy, we learn how to fix them. It's also important skills to be developed in the basis helps us outside the round. Drop the video on T. 8 point, holding accountable theory. So drop the argument to what advocate for never and did their use to keep coming to do better. B point, the right choice in the beginning because their advocacy is really the ability to and stop something that's to solve the abuse. C point, drop the argument to say things stop the air. So C that you advocate turns. I think that can actually this case doesn't solve theory. They should be taking in charge of the ability and like arbitrary judging based on preference as an organization and person based model in which the able to display their responsible parts of organization or the United States with the right side on theory that's it. The round the angles the judiciary to with they don't also engage because there's no possible debate actually. They run theory to have everything theories is good for reciprocals because of the role they will check use sometimes and here's time keeping thinking about to our theory out. Next on. The 1AC misdiagnosis of the problem. Gun control represents a narrow legalistic solution to gun violence, which in reality is a broader cultural problem. Esposito and Finley 14. Gun culture has been reinforced and neoliberalism established the right FSA individuals the only concern. Forcing neoliberalism enforced that universities and autonomous individuals really pursuing their self-interest. Certain questions about the social dimension of the issue. Those who need to minimize gun violence need to expand their critique. The 300 million guns that currently exist in the U.S. will not disappear. Whether or not stricter gun laws are passed, a more holistic would include building a popular movement that challenges ideological forces and promote gun violence. Efforts to challenge the neoliberal worldview that erode social bonds. The rhetoric of democratic accountability is a Trojan horse for neoliberal dominance by the U.S. Evans, a 1. Capitalist state promotes democracy procedural guides that the democratic institutions run means of achieving economic transformation would have to be empowered by the core being new democratic regime which temporarily enjoys peaceful legitimacy and undertaking economic policy comes with hardships of the general population. Democratic participation is way maintaining an order that supports the interests of global capital. This is especially true given the act framing its bid as a classroom governed by critical pedagogy linked to Mr. Rowe evidence of Zavar said 03. The pedagogy of appearance makes experiencing virtual reality of stories social release of production of material conditions of experience. Radical pedagogues such as Roy Visser classes and explanatory concepts to turn the unity of the working class into brain differences. Experience converts CAP into an institution of cultural pressure based on power. Classes thus become students created and acts as non-necessity of wage labor. The classroom experience produces all concepts of affects instead of an institution where they change it only interprets and repeats the differences. Roy explains for the class when the pedagogy epistemology in virtual law and pedagogy class policy purposes as a theory whose aim is to turn class into cultural experience. The student understands his own unique experience as black and never as a proletariat. Terms case, neoliberal extinction, massive social inequalities. Yeah, single issue legalistic solution is the exact kind of politics neoliberalism wants us to engage in. It produces symbolic victories that allow the root cause to go unquestioned. Far beyond 15. We need transforming politics that can the fundamentals of cap instead of its symptoms. Cancel and comfort for endless growth in the system's DNA and is what has said about attractive solution course with nature. The major solutions tend to be legislative promising temporary amendment. The critical task is to build transformative politics. People will steer the system away from its destructive path. Such politics must challenge the system's fundamentals. This debate is about starting points. The applicant puts gun control, but which puts the cart before the horse. The alternative is a cultural anti-neoliberal critique, which is a necessary prerequisite to the act. Esposito and Finley 14. Efforts cannot remain focused on tweaking gun laws. What is a popular movement that will challenge the pro-gun lobby and line itself with other anti-neoliberal movements for systemic and social economic changes will exist that exist extreme individuals who encourage by neoliberalism must be exposed to the antithetics of the same side. What might be neither the shift in social logic is from the neoliberal stuff only individuals matter without challenging the social structure and underlying values to promote gun violence. I doesn't realize the problem will not be effective. The role of the judge is to be a critical analyst as to whether the underlying assumptions of the affirmative are valid. The question is whether the act scholarship is good, not for passage intellectual does not to offer prescriptive solutions, but to offer analyses and potential amount of power to bring them to light. Jones 99. The central aspect of intellectuals is undermined from discourse through educational activity. They just find that the people who the anti-atheist effect on dominant discourse is more important in the long run. This institution once is natural and now unacceptable. Solutions requires that intellectuals undermine the natural. This creates biblically which alternative considered politics to be developed. The educational activity should support and social movements promote anticipatory change, critique of prevailing order, and to alternative views. Second, the knowledge claim for the one is good, but something off point for the debate. Our current provides a more reasonable network when a student turns in FD for no teacher has an obligation to write an entirely new paper just to show that it was bad. Canceling and pointing out major academic deficiencies is justified filling the paper. The balance actually is better debating. So if their analysis is wrong, they have it. Third, the case of prior question, understanding all use is a prerequisite to effective gun control policy. Esposito and family 14. Gun control debates revolving the question of whether or not war guns produce more crime. Focus on the outcomes indoors. Both sides of the debate are a fundamentally different worldviews given with their respective interpretations of that thing. The taking into account the different perspectives, culture, and people's attitudes. These all take out the drill card about why we need action in addition to critique. Additionally, action without critique, or just in addition without critique. First, we see constitutional policy failure because we see actions we take are not taking into account the criticisms and the cultural problems they take into the effect whether or not the action is successful, which means even if doing good and doing both is good, the critique is a prior question to the affirmative case. First term, the main problem with the act is that we get a great explanation of why gun culture is bad, but no solution of why banning a small subset of gun solves. Guns are a response to militarism and fear, not the cause. It's not reverse causal. If Americans are afraid to go out, taking away what the act is misleading with the optimal self-defense tool, according to the low card, does not get rid of the fear, but merely amplifies it. This is empirically confirmed. Handgun bans equal substitution effect make criminals more violent and militarized. Cobalt, while handgun bans are usually survivable, shotgun blasts are much more fatal. In Australia and Canada, handgun homicide rate is lower than Switzerland, and total homicide rates over 100% greater. Although Switzerland essentially deadly weapons number, in which Morocco is sufficiently large to increase the overall death toll. 30% of persons attended homicide rate from handguns to longest school homicide rate increase. 72% of handgun criminal justice movement is sought out shotguns. The 70% substitution rate leads to normal multiplication of handguns. The non-US is not responsive. Australia is not similar to the US. Conservatives, not political sports, gun control, whereas we don't have that. If you're confirmed by 10 oppositions, even basic measures such as universal background checks for basic people to say gun rights, no major Republican candidate supports any gun restrictions of any favor. The expansion of weapons, elimination of gun control. Finally, a handgun ban causes massive policing and incarceration. More guns screws over. More militarization. Verbiage 15. Gun trophies, many more criminal offenders, therefore more criminals, more creative, for military control racial. But there's multiple police points are in black and white. These are without really constrained force from SWAT to stop and trace the mass incarceration.
That's cardiac mass incarceration. Didn't read WW15.
Correct. And nothing below the left.
Yeah.
There's one card below the left.
Yeah. Anything else on the back you didn't read?
Nope.
Good. Stats of the alt.
Unconditional.
Mutual dependent debate. You say that the alt is an interrogation of like the cultural aspects of gun control. What does that interrogation entail? You say like we should do it, but how does the 1MC go about actually doing it?
So first, it's a correct diagnosis of the problem. The 1AC's legalistic solution to a social problem means you have misanalyzed the causes and the solutions to a problem. So a better analysis of the way the future can
the 1AC seems to have a very the 1AC seems to have a very robust account of how gun culture is ingrained in American culture, which is extremely similar to what the 1MC sounds like. How are the two analyses we give distinct?
So I disagree. Your app talks about the way that gun culture, like militarism and neoliberalism causes people to want guns, not why gun control is a good response.
So it seems as though all of your link arguments are just like state bad, legalism, rules of solvency arguments.
Don't think that's true at all. The first, we can go through the specifics. The first argument.
I'm fine. The theory violation. You say it's extra T because it involves things like sharing data and training programs for officials. Why is things like sharing data extra T when I'm forced to specify a mechanism anyway? For example, you say when you might say things like buyback or extra T, even though that involves giving people money before they take the guns.
Sure. So something like a buyback program, or something like local police or federal police, like the ATF, enforcing and going to people's homes and taking away their guns. Or
somehow both of them doing it in combination is worse.
Yes, because the combination of both of first, if you defended every state doing it, that probably wouldn't be good anyway. But the unique abuse comes from
Wait, what does that mean? If you defended every state doing it, what is it, and what does that mean?
You're like, if they do it separately, then it's okay. Like, if you defended all 50 states doing something without federal government, like, I mean, under my interest, that makes sense, like, probably still bad. I mean, not actually under my interest, but, like, according to the standards. It's not like, that would be
what app can I read? Is it just federal government?
You can read federal government, you can read, like, one state passes a policy, or, like, city passes a
Oh, I've
policy,
seen
like,
one state app. Okay. The arguments that you read on case, the framework arguments at the bottom, you say pointing out major academic deficiencies in the YC should be sufficient to like vote neg, I guess. I guess my question is, why does that not mean that pointing out major academic good things in the YC is sufficient to vote out? Why is that not reciprocal?
So if you're like, teacher, I wrote an amazing paper, look how really good, like, my intro and my body paragraphs are, but I plagiarized the entire conclusion. That would not be like, look, I did most of it right.
Cameron,
That's obviously not
Cameron, the two are not comparable. Let's say that I wrote this sick paper, it had like 9 pages of awesome stuff, and then the conclusion was like sort of bad. Somehow I failed.
I disagree that the conclusion is sort of bad. There were large instrumental problems with the affirmative case. Those are reasons the judge was negative.
Can we all result in that?
What?
Can we all result in that?
What does it mean to result in the app? The framework argument to me, that's not a question. It's not a question of the point or policy argument.
So no policy, you will not defend like a policy in the framework.
That's not relevant, because the framework.
No, not a question of whether it's relevant. Will you defend policy in the framework?
I defend the alternative. I don't defend the policy.
My question is, okay, so now.
I defend the alternative.
That's so helpful, thank you. Minute 53, email to you. Yep. Or I guess I'll flash it.
Yep. Yeah.
You all want me to email you back now? The theory violation, the case,
But a theory violation means not by interpretation.
there's, theory, case, okay. Still good?
coordination. The act that the United States federal government take action in coordination with the 50 state governments. Evidently, if they have a solvency act that says gun control should be taken by, should be implemented by both federal and state governments. So we have a son about bans, but it's about gun control. That's a counter now. No, but if you say censorship, no, that's obviously not true. You create a ridiculous or we just kind of enforcement mechanism. Coordination is not anything actionable in the same way that someone giving someone money to buy bad guns is not actionable. It is some necessary intermediary steps are necessary for any enforcement mechanism, which means your interpretation of action commonality is literally impossible. Also, federal and state coordination is uniquely key having to think about culture. You say that otherwise it would just be solvency questions, which is what your second argument is about. That is utopia. We will see all your arguments about how discussions of gun control should be cultural discussions, not implementation. Which your first of your utopian thinking arguments is not a question of whether the states would actually do it, or rather a question of what culture we should do, which means that the one state can be more cultural oriented, but the states would actually do it. Also, fiat solves all that. Even if it is utopian, anything would be utopian in the context because the federal government is obviously not going to pass a Hague ban either, which means utopia fiat is inevitable in this context. Dual enforcement is uniquely good. It's grounded in popular literature, which means that you arbitrarily exclude acts that it is impossible for us to predict, which is decide to interpret. And it also supports for advocacy skills, because you're never able to advocate things that are actually best in the popular literature. Now, it was an RPI, the only voter around is advocacy skills. None of your arguments assume that force you to defend with your interpretation. Advocacy skills just the ability to defend things. You get to think out of it, the two and are, you get to think out of it, the two and are otherwise now the case. First argument is that we not isolate that it is reverse possible, though we will go to the Donahue evidence, that's later on the flow. But now the substitution argument, there's substitution. In fact, case in 93, one has had the reliability statements of history as one where they would bring the carry cracking in line, very much likely small percentage of murders were committed with the longest state. It's probable someone eternally saw a less lethal weapon. There's a reason for long guns are obviously much more difficult to see. No longer wielding a long gun will cause everyone to hang up the more convenient ways, not relevant to the sees cultural shift arguments now. The Donahue evidence, you say that they are not similar. You've not isolated anyways, it's different. You just assert that in Australia, garnered a lot of political support, but our evidence even indicates to a British Prime Minister who was willing to overcome public dissent and that it caused cultural shift because it was not because guns were not always present to solve your problems, which means that we obviously want this argument now. The policing argument is not unique. There's some differences exist now. Your evidence even indicates that also the case that ways we so the cultural balance that you should work for us now. You also conceded all the material harm to the one you see like gun control and violence, which is our Giroux evidence in which is our Giroux and our can evidence that our policy should reflect our culture, which is functionally permutation card of your critique that you concede now. The critique. The question, the resolution asks the question separately about security. Yes, and the question separately claim the instrument, the legit and miraculous consequences for that equal fairness, the evidence be prevented, infinite interpretation, then you come up with a produce an unpredictable net ground, which seems to be the way from after and causes time to do the link terms education, very speed point governance heuristic is not an abstraction, rather means understanding the same breaking down. This card is sweet. It also kicks out all three of the arguments you put under the 9014 resistance governance, how the constitutional struggle set within the government rationality transform the family interacts in complex ways in which diverse political spaces governance heuristic advice and careful differentiation method overshadowing the dimension of power and foster and ethical political engagement taken up through moral practices which may continue its attention to what happened instead of what ought to be that big engagement would constantly attempt to power playing which with whatever cards are available and would attempt to reflexivity on consequence of political choice. In my decision, at least not academic activism and permanently now the link level of all of this is just that cultural analysis is good and legal solutions are bad. First, if we win the case, and that obviously disproves that because it proves that legal solutions would work. Also, the one you see is a cultural analysis. It says that it happens usually between diagnosis and solution. A little bit wrong. That's not reason you should reject the entire scholarship of the one you see. 90% of our people was good, but a little bit of it was wrong. That's not a reason to give us an apple. So permutation, you use a cultural analysis and then implement the policies response to that. And permutation solves we recognize critiquing on that's necessary by that should be combined with the one you see. This was to row routine. Critique is not enough of that discourse over only despair hopes speaks to matching like anti-capitalism combines realistic limits with demanding the impossible, not referring to form of increases concrete obstacles, but continues the ongoing task of present open and finish this time to develop a way which is provide under social responsibility comes invigorating to new imagination strategies for lasting a little nightmare. Also takes out ways you can see all of our things. One night from the one see like people getting killed on the streets of Chicago, which the alternative never solves, which means that if we win, even that we should give away the case of that using the state always good, that is a reason to vote.
You got it, right? Yep. infirmary. Yep.
Theory on the RBI stuff, then AC, then
Is the your stuff just RBI stuff? Parts.
yes.
Cool. I will give it at least 3-1. Email set. The cards are numbered, right?
Yep.
Sorry, I don't know what is in order.
Or expertise stuff with the RBI system.
Yeah, the RBI
Plan.
system.
Let's see here. Is everyone ready?
I am not going for theory. I went on terms and the critique. This means theory. A theory is not an RBI. I don't go negative on it. But he says they force the defender interpretation of agency. The argument that RBI forced the entire remedy of that theory, which they just really for evidence skills. Now with 8 points, I'm going to RBI because it's a full theory and substance. So we need to multiple different types of avenues. So we're going to defend one advocacy the entire round. B point first, they're going to be entirely about theory. Never talk about substance, which is really worse because substance is more real world related to regular and related to actual issues. So we consider advocates learn about actual things that we care about. Whereas toxicology and theory debates are not as important things to the advocates for. So they're not as significant. C point is that there's no weighing on theory debates. People are bad at them, which means they're not as good and don't teach us to stand up for things as well as actual advocacies that people in the real advocate for. So solvency advocates and evidence that are on real debates are comparatively better. Second is I'm still defending advocacy of debate substance, even if I kick theory, which means you're not defending nothing. I'm still responding to all the objections and defending the advocacy because I get it unconditionally. We can know unique class advocacy skills and mispractice skills. You can see advocacy skills the most important. Sorry, advocacy skills and substitution are the most important types of things. RBIs are uniquely bad for them. Please concede to my argument for 1 and C. On the strength of like I put defense on cases, which means no RBIs. The substitution effect argument is game over. One response is not sufficient when I have empirics and proves that the act does not solve anything. Coble says that in Australia, where his own evidence talks about how there was a culture shift. In fact, there was not a culture shift, but people just switched handguns to buy other worse things like shotguns and rifles, which cause overall more violence. 2 implications. 8 point. It means the act solves literally nothing because the problem is a cultural one, but not a liberal, not a legalistic one. So even if the act bans guns, bans handguns, it does not ban all guns. So even if you violence, and it's not handguns particularly, and allowing people to have other types of guns is incredibly worse because the culture still exists, and people will get them in other ways. The point makes the act comparatively worse because it means there would be more militarism in a world in which people still want to commit violence and still think fear of outsiders, but that has more violent means of doing so. Cohen says that when there was a substitution effect, it caused more violence, even though there was less overall shootings. In each individual shooting was more likely to be a homicide or a more significant form of violence, which is a worse form of militarism. But also, additionally proves the act solves literally nothing. So there is 0% risk of solvency for the affirmative. There is no reason the permutation will be good. There's a reason why the alternative alone would solve the case better. Now, the only offense we will go for on the case is why the Donahue evidence is an empirical example of how a shifted culture is obviously not relevant. I have made arguments about why there was a different culture in Australia. His evidence does not identify that there was the same culture. There's one line in a study about why people looked at things differently when people empirically looked at things the same and committed more violence as a result of when shocking is comparatively better. His Dixon entry card is an analytical warning about why long guns are not as concealable, so they're harder to use, which is not relevant if empirically that more people did use them and they cause worse violence. That means vote negative on case, even if I would lose the case now. Overview. Gun violence is not an isolated individual phenomenon, but a predictable response to neoliberals and emphasis on the rugged individual and the corporatized control politics by organizations like the NRA. The assault is one symptom of gun violence, but fails to identify the root cause. There are several important impacts. First is the palliative way. The act represents a legalistic solution to a social and cultural problem. Canada has the same number of guns as the U.S., but like 11 people die from guns every year. A ban on guns clearly doesn't solve our violence-driven culture and its criminal defense to the plan. Even the world with bans, tons of people, guns will probably be illicit market with drugs, like with drugs or alcohol, or from every member of the NRA who refuse to give them up. The act makes us feel like we solved gun violence, while its true causes go unchecked. That is, it gets that depermutation. The act makes us feel like we solved new labor, when in reality it does nothing, and prevents necessary social reform. The ultimate alone provides. The European argument is also a unique disadvantage to depermutation that works in conjunction with the palliative link, because when we don't solve the real problem of why people want guns, the government will just crack down in more ways. The example that they have done with drugs, saying that the government is not unique because people like we're stopping for now is obviously not responsive, giving government an ability to go out after 300 million more people with a huge number of new excuses to investigate people, to go to people's homes, to take guns away from them, gives government an excuse to convict more people, and allows them to come because more militarism expands the power of the government. This is an independent disadvantage affirmative that also proves a disadvantage permutation. The second link is misdiagnosis. Since the problem is cultural, asserting a legal solution to response means they have not correctly analyzed the problem. It's not that they have forgotten to mention how, but they have explained the problem. Their explanation blames legalistic factors with simultaneously an alibi for the economy and cultural problems. It's like trying to fix your car and saying there's a problem with your tires, when in reality the engine is broken. And misdiagnosis of the problem means their solution inevitably fails. Our framework means that's a voting issue. We prove that significantly misanalyze the problem they want to see, which is academically bankrupt and sufficient for them to lose. This is an ethics challenge to the affirmative. Our exposure to neolib and the cultural problem is something you want to see actively fail to do, and a reason you should vote negative. The perm also doesn't solve this. It's not even to the plan, but to the representation. You have a chance to write an AC about the culture of neoliberalism, but instead they chose to talk about a way legalistic solution to solve these problems. That was a strategic choice, and they don't get to stand up and change what they say after we call it out. Their misdiagnosis of the problem was the half speech, and the reason they should lose. They have also fully conceded two other links, which make it game over on the permutation debate. The Evans card says that the one is focus on democracy as a good idea is necessarily reinforces capitalism, because capitalist leaders like to promote the idea of democracy so they can intervene in other countries and promote their capitalist agenda, and also so they can get people to agree with more capitalist authoritarian policies the government passed. The Veritas argument is also a disadvantage and proves a link to Giroux, which the one you see is a specific framing argument, because it proves that Giroux's ideology of everyone should think for themselves and focus on experience makes people allow people to not quantify objective things like the way capitalism is necessarily bad. He has conceded the impact part that says guns are the root cause of violence. You mean saying that people are killed on the street of Chicago obviously is not solving anything. The case doesn't do anything. People will still have guns, and if neoliberalism is the root cause of the violence. Now the permutation I've already answered and proven that there are dissensions to it. The framework arguments. First, the framework, no link, our alternative is policy relevant. The assumption of legalistic technical solutions are our only option, unnecessarily concede the policymakers and activists consider legal reform that still a case to a solution. This policy has to make the norm, but it isn't a rule. His argument about why it's fairness is not relevant because advocacy outweighs that. It's argument that theory debate, and also because it's fair to defend representations. Not is not relevant. It's not a critique of all government policies, but specific representations of the affirmative, which proves that the alternative alone is better, even under his methodology, because it is a no desirability of the plan.
Minute 53. the order is the case, the substitution argument, and then I guess it's sort of all about the firm already, but it'll be starting on the piece of direct evidence that is read in the
Very little evidence compares to none of the two under the substitution that we use to serve the North is really bad. Yours is substantially worse. It just says that Switzerland does not have a lot of people to kill each other while Australia does, but that's not isolated. And that is uniquely because of a hangover that they switched over, which means that you share heavily on the side of causal evidence that says they would, because it is very substantially more likely that the people are just lying about them were being willing to switch, and that very few murders are committed with long deaths already, which means it's unlikely that they were willing to switch. Also, the concealment argument is obviously true. People are not just going to carry around sawed-off shotguns, which is functionally what your evidence says would happen, which means that it is obviously untrue. You've just not isolated an argument about it. You've also not isolated that evidence talks about how those are just gun deaths. It just says they are murders generally, which means that it doesn't isolate that as the key internally, which all of which arguments and evidence points out now. The next argument is that we are key to shift culture. You say that Australia was different. That is obviously not the case. We have a good line of evidence that says it took a great prime minister, which obviously implies that there were people that opposed it in Australia as well. However, that caused a cultural shift because individuals did recognize after a while that they no longer needed guns to defend themselves. Guns were not key to anything, which is why Australia's murder rate 1 for 100,000, which is also substantially less than the United States, which our evidence indicates. Either way, it's not either way, even if you win the empirics debate, it's not a question that we'll concede. It is about what policy should reflect our cultural values, which means that if we win, that any involvement of legalistic policies is good, then that is the reason you should vote AF, even under the critiques framing, which we are functionally conceding. It's just a question of whether involving the state at all or representing the state as a possibility for solution is good. The K. Which our can evidence says it is. It says the culture should shape policy, which you conceded. That was on the case at the bottom of the 1AR. It's like a conceded perm argument. It says that our policy should be shaped by our culture, which is our permutation argument. Now the K. US if you just had, I'll go through all of them. The first on the board, which you said, it's obviously not unique. You say you give people more excuses for crackdown. However, the government already has enough excuses. There's no reason that they would just start doing it more now. The reason of solvency is that, one, we do not claim to solve 100% of gun violence. Our 914 evidence has something on issue that resistance to government has to be done within the government. We learn about the government so that we should transform the government. Is a heuristic. It is something that we should learn about, not something that we should always engage in, which means that the one state does not lead to any of your arguments. You say this is a heuristic. We will not go for this as a framework argument. We will go for this as a link turn argument, which you conceded. The second argument, the other links are not relevant. They are used to not specific enough to gun control. You say things like democracy is cabin and focus on individual experiences bad. However, we will in that tangible focus on legalistic policies outweighs all of those links. You've not isolated impacts to those specific links. We will let's say impact of tangible policy, which is our 15 evidence. This is the permutation argument. I dare you to read this card and tell me it is not awesome. It says that critique is not enough, but we should rather use a discourse of hope, which combines critique, which is the alternative, cultural analysis that was also in the 1C with your policy reforms that are incremental, which also solves all of your co-ops and research. We recognize we will not solve everything, but we will certainly solve something. Maybe a few less people will die, or maybe our gun policies will actually reflect a culture that is good and reflect a culture that recognizes because we're not necessarily solving anything, which means that your critique is not enough without a discourse of hope, which is what the alternative lacks, which means which also pushes a no-blame argument to all of your parts of the critique and outweighs. You do not include that, which makes it literally impossible. It literally says it's time to develop a political language of social responsibility. The alternative to not does that. It results in literally nothing.
Yeah, the only thing that I think in the email thread that is not read is some 1 and C cards that go for anyway, and the 2 and 4 cards.